Grace Thornton had already learned how to disappear before she was old enough to understand what it meant to be unseen. At 24, she moved through grand houses like a quiet shadow. She opened doors before they were asked to be opened. She poured tea before anyone noticed their cup was empty. She read aloud for hours in a calm, steady voice, never stumbling, never complaining. She listened to secrets that were never meant for her ears and carried them to her grave in silence. She had once been the daughter of a respected country vicar in the small town of Willow Creek, Massachusetts. Her father had believed in books, in honesty, and in raising his only child to think for herself. But when he died suddenly of a winter fever, he left behind more debts than savings. Grace was 16 then. By 17, she had taken her first position as a companion to an elderly widow in Boston. 8 years passed like pages turning in a book no one else wanted to read. Grace owned no fine jewels. She had no dowry, no powerful uncles, no brothers in business. Her beauty was quiet, the kind that needed sunlight and patience to be noticed. Her soft brown hair caught golden shades when she walked outdoors. Her hazel eyes held warmth and intelligence, though most people never looked long enough to see it. She dressed in simple gray and navy gowns that marked her place clearly. She had long ago accepted that love stories belonged to other women. Women with fortunes, women with shining names, women whose laughter echoed in ballrooms, while gentlemen bowed deeply before them. Grace believed she would spend her life reading about such love rather than living it. That belief began to crumble on a rain-soaked afternoon in October 1892. Peterson Hall stood tall on the hills outside Hartford, Connecticut. It was a grand estate owned by the wealthy Peterson family. Grace had been hired to serve as companion to Lady Margaret Peterson, the sharp-minded aunt of the lady of the house. Rain struck the tall windows of the estate library that afternoon. The room smelled of old leather and polished wood. Grace entered quietly, sent to retrieve a Gothic novel for Lady Margaret's reading hour. She reached for a thick book placed high on a shelf. She stood on her toes. The book slipped from her fingers. Before it struck the floor, a strong hand caught it. Grace gasped and looked up. But the man standing before her was unlike any she had seen outside of paintings. Tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark, tailored coat that fit him perfectly, he carried himself with quiet authority. His hair was dark and neatly styled. His blue eyes were sharp, observant, and far too aware. "Careful," he said gently. "These books have survived longer than either of us." His voice was deep and calm, with a hint of amusement. Grace lowered her eyes quickly. "Thank you, sir. I was careless." "You were reaching for knowledge," he replied. "That is rarely careless." She dared to look up again. He was still watching her. Not with boredom, not with dismissal, but with interest. "Edward Ravenshire," he said, offering a polite nod. The name struck her like thunder. Ravenshire, one of the wealthiest and most respected ducal families in New York, which meant the man before her was not simply Edward Ravenshire. He was Duke Edward Ravenshire. Grace's heart pounded. Grace Thornton, your grace," she said softly, giving a perfect curtsy. "Companion to Lady Margaret." He studied her as though she had just said something remarkable. "Miss Thornton," he said slowly, "tell me, do you enjoy these Gothic novels, or are they simply part of your duty?" The question surprised her. Most gentlemen would not ask for her opinion. "I enjoy them, your grace," she answered carefully, "though I wish the heroines were braver." His eyebrow lifted. "Braver?" "They faint too often," she said before she could stop herself. "They wait to be rescued, I prefer women who rescue themselves." Silence followed. Grace felt heat rise in her cheeks. She had spoken too freely. "I apologize," she said quickly. "It was not my place." On the contrary, the Duke smiled. It was exactly your place." Something shifted in the air between them. For the first time in years, Grace felt seen. Not as a servant, not as a shadow, but as a woman with thoughts worth hearing. The rain outside grew heavier. Thunder rolled across the hills. Edward Ravenshire did not look away from her. "You speak with education," he observed, "and confidence. That is not common in your position." "My father valued learning," Grace replied quietly, "even when we could not afford much else." He nodded slowly, as if filing the information away. "You do not sound like someone meant to stand in the background, Miss Thornton." Her breath caught. Background was all she had ever known. "Some of us are born to watch others shine," she said softly. "And some," he replied, stepping a little closer, "are simply waiting for the right moment." Her pulse quickened in a way that frightened her. A duke did not speak this way to a companion. A duke did not look at her as if she were rare. "Your Grace," she whispered, "I should return to Lady Margaret." "Of course," he said, though something in his voice suggested reluctance. "May I hope to speak with you again?" She hesitated. This was dangerous. Men of his rank married heiresses. They did not fall in love with women without dowries. But something inside her refused to hide again. "I am often in the library," she said carefully. His smile deepened. Then I shall develop a sudden love for books." As Grace left the library, her hands trembled. She told herself it meant nothing. He was simply kind. He was bored. He would forget her tomorrow. But the next morning, as golden sunlight spread across the gardens of Peterson Hall, Grace stepped onto the gravel path for her usual walk and froze. The Duke was there, mounted on a magnificent black horse. He looked powerful and effortless. When he saw her, he dismounted immediately. "Oh, good morning, Miss Thornton." "Good morning, Your Grace." They began walking side by side. The world felt different, too bright, too alive. "Tell me," he said, "if you could write your own story, how would it end?" She laughed softly. "I would not dare write such things." "Why not?" "Because stories like that are not meant for women like me." He stopped walking. "Women like you? Without fortune, without connections." "Without pretense," he corrected. "Without greed. Without calculation." She looked at him sharply. "You do not know me well enough to say that." "I know enough." His voice had changed. It was no longer playful. It was serious. "I have met many women who wish to marry me," he continued quietly. "They see a title, a future, a fortune." "And what do you see?" she asked, before fear could silence her. "I see a woman who speaks honestly, who does not tremble before rank, who values courage." Her heart pounded painfully. "Ian, this cannot lead anywhere," she said softly. "You are a duke. I am a companion." "Does that matter to you?" he asked. "Yes." "Does it matter to your heart?" She could not answer. The truth was too dangerous. He stepped closer. "I am tired of marriages built on convenience," he said. "I want something real." "And you think you found it in a woman with no dowry?" "I think I found it in a woman with strength." Tears filled her eyes before she realized it. "Edward," she whispered, using his name for the first time. The sound of it seemed to shake him. "Grace," he replied, just as softly. The wind stirred the trees around them. "If we continue this," she said, "there will be scandal. Then let there be scandal. My position, I will protect you. My heart, I will cherish it." Silence stretched between them. The world felt like it was waiting. I have never been chosen before," she admitted. "Not truly." He reached for her hand. "You are choosing me as well," he said gently. "Do not forget that." Her defenses began to fall. For 8 years she had lived carefully, quietly, safely. Now everything felt uncertain, but alive. "I do not want to be a secret," she said at last. "You will not be." His voice carried promise. "I do not want to be pitied. You will be honored, and I do not want to lose myself. You will become more yourself than ever." She looked into his blue eyes and saw something she had never seen directed at her before. Respect. Desire. Hope. The rain from yesterday had washed the air clean. Grace took a slow breath. "Then we walk this path honestly," she said. His hand tightened gently around hers. Honestly. Neither of them noticed the figure watching from the balcony above. Lady Eleanor Peterson. And the expression on her face promised that peace would not last long. The peace of that golden morning did not survive the week. By the time Sunday arrived, whispers had already begun to move through Peterson Hall like smoke under a closed door. Servants who once passed Grace without notice now lowered their eyes with curiosity. Footsteps paused outside rooms. Conversation stopped when she entered. Lady Eleanor Peterson had not wasted time. She invited Edward for tea in the grand drawing room the very next afternoon. Grace was not present, but she felt the tension in the air as clearly as if she had stood between them. Edward joined Grace later that evening in the library. His jaw was tight. "She knows," he said quietly. Grace closed the book in her lap. "I expected she would." "She accused you of ambition," he continued, anger flashing in his blue eyes. "She suggested you had trapped me." The words struck deeper than Grace expected. "I see," she said softly. "Do not look like that," Edward said immediately. "I defended you." "You should not have needed to," she replied. He stepped closer. "Grace, I will not allow anyone to insult you." "This is only the beginning," she said gently. "If Lady Eleanor speaks, others will follow." Edward ran a hand through his dark hair. "Let them." "It is easy for you to say that." You are a duke, and you are the woman I love." The word still startled her. Love. It had grown quickly between them, but it felt steady. Real. "Edward," she said carefully, "what do you intend?" His eyes did not waver. "I intend to marry you." The air seemed to thin. "Marry me," she repeated. "Yes." "Without consulting your family?" "I am not a boy." "Without considering what society will say?" "I have considered it." She rose slowly from her chair. "You would risk your name, yet your influence, your mother's approval." "I would risk anything except losing you." Her throat tightened. "You say that now," she whispered. "But when the pressure grows, when invitations stop arriving, when doors close, then we will build our own doors," he interrupted firmly. A sharp knock cut through the moment. Lady Eleanor entered without waiting for permission. She was elegant and composed, her gray silk gown perfectly arranged. But her eyes were cold. Your Grace," she said smoothly to Edward. "Miss Thornton." Grace curtsied. "I trust I am not interrupting anything inappropriate," Lady Eleanor added lightly. Edward's expression hardened. "You are interrupting nothing," he replied. "Good," she said, "because I would hate to see my household dragged into scandal." Grace kept her gaze lowered. "I have always valued your service, Miss Thornton," Lady Eleanor continued. "But certain boundaries must be respected." Edward stepped forward. "If you have something to say, Lady Eleanor, say it plainly." "Very well." She turned fully to Grace. "It has come to my attention that you have encouraged my guest's attention, that you have forgotten your position." Grace lifted her chin. "I have forgotten nothing." "Have you not?" Lady Eleanor's voice sharpened. "You are employed here, a paid companion. It would be wise to remember that." Edward's patience broke. "Enough," he said. "I am the one who pursued Miss Thornton, not the other way around." Lady Eleanor blinked in surprise. "You cannot be serious." "I am entirely serious." Silence filled the room. Lady Eleanor's gaze moved between them slowly. "You would not dare," she said at last. "I would," Edward answered. Grace felt her heart pound. Lady Eleanor's lips tightened. "If you choose to ruin your reputation, that is your affair. But I will not have this house turned into gossip." Edward straightened. "Then you should know that I have already made my decision." Grace looked at him sharply. "Edward!" He reached for her hand. "I am asking Miss Grace Thornton to become my wife." The words fell heavy in the room. Lady Eleanor's composure cracked. "You have lost your senses." "No," he said calmly. "For the first time, I have found them." Lady Eleanor turned to Grace. "Do you understand what you are doing?" she demanded. "Do you truly believe you can survive as a duchess? That the scrutiny alone would destroy you?" Grace felt fear stir inside her, but she also felt something stronger. "I do not seek your approval," she said quietly. "Only honesty." Lady Eleanor stared at her, stunned. "You will regret this," she warned. "Perhaps," Grace replied. "But regret is not the same as fear." Lady Eleanor left without another word. The door closed with a sharp sound. Grace exhaled slowly. "You should not have done that publicly," she said to Edward. I should have done it sooner. Your family will hear. They will. And your mother?" He hesitated for the first time. "She will not be pleased." Within days, the news reached New York. Edward's mother, the Dowager Duchess of Ravenshire, arrived in Hartford in a fury. Her presence carried weight. She entered Peterson Hall with a posture that commanded obedience. Grace met her in the formal sitting room. The Dowager Duchess was tall and dignified, dressed in deep burgundy velvet, and her silver hair was arranged perfectly. Her eyes were sharp and assessing. "So," she said coolly, studying Grace from head to toe, "you are the young woman." Grace curtsied. "Yes, Your Grace." "A vicar's daughter?" "Yes." "No fortune?" "No." "No connections?" "No." The silence stretched. "And yet," the Dowager continued, "you believe yourself fit to become Duchess of Ravenshire." "I believe myself fit to love your son," Grace answered steadily. The Dowager's eyes narrowed. "My love does not manage estates." "No." "Love does not secure alliances." "No." "Love does not silence scandal." "No," Grace repeated calmly. "But it strengthens people enough to face those things." Edward stepped forward. "Mother, this is not a debate." "It is precisely that," she replied sharply. "You are about to make a mistake that will follow this family for generations. I'm about to marry the woman I love. You are about to throw away centuries of careful legacy." Edward's voice softened, but did not weaken. "Legacy means nothing if it is built on emptiness." The Dowager turned back to Grace. "Do you understand the hatred you will face?" she asked quietly. "The cruelty? Society can be merciless." Grace's hands trembled slightly, but her voice did not. "I have faced cruelty before," she said, "in silence, alone. I would rather face it honestly, but beside someone who respects me." The Dowager looked at her for a long time. "You speak well," she admitted, "but words are easy." Then allow time to prove the rest, Grace replied. The Dowager rose. I will not give my blessing, she declared. But I will not forbid you either. If you proceed, you do so without my support. Edward nodded slowly. I accept that. The Dowager left the room with cold dignity. Grace felt her strength waver once the door closed. She hates me, she whispered. She fears losing control, Edward corrected. She fears losing you. He cupped her face gently. She will learn. And if she does not, then we will build our own happiness. Days turned into weeks. Invitations stopped arriving for Edward. Newspapers began printing whispers. The Hartford Gazette published a polite but pointed article questioning the wisdom of aristocratic marriages beneath one's station. Grace saw it, but she folded the paper quietly and set it aside. You may still step back, she told Edward one evening. He looked at her as if the idea insulted him. Never. Even now? Especially now. Her heart swelled with both love and fear. You understand, she said softly. Once we marry, there is no returning to the life you had. I do not want that life. She searched his face for doubt. There was none. Then we marry, she whispered. The decision settled between them like destiny. Outside, autumn winds began to change. And far beyond Hartford, society prepared for a storm that neither Grace nor Edward fully understood was coming. The wedding took place on a cold but bright morning in November 1892. Ravenshire Manor stood tall along the Hudson River in New York, its stone walls steady against the wind. Generations of Ravenshires had married within its chapel. Wealthy brides, influential families, perfect alliances. Never a woman without a dowry, never a former companion. Grace stood alone in a quiet room overlooking the river. Her wedding gown was simple ivory silk, elegant but not heavy with jewels. She had refused excess. She wanted no disguise, no illusion. She wanted to walk toward Edward as herself. Her hands trembled only once, and she pressed them together until they steadied. Below, carriages arrived slowly. Some guests came out of loyalty to Edward. Some came out of curiosity. Some came to witness what they believed would be a spectacular mistake. Edward waited at the front of the chapel, tall and unshaken. His dark coat was perfectly fitted. His expression held no doubt. When Grace entered, escorted by Lord Peterson, a hush fell over the chapel. Whispers rose and faded. Some eyes were cold, some were skeptical. But Edward's eyes were warm, and they never left her. With each step down the aisle, Grace felt something powerful settle inside her. Not fear, and not shame, but certainty. She had spent years believing she was small. Today she understood she had simply been unseen. The vows were spoken clearly. I, Edward Charles Ravenshire, take you, Grace Elizabeth Thornton, to be my wife. His voice did not shake. I, Grace Elizabeth Thornton, take you, Edward Charles Ravenshire, to be my husband. Her voice was steady. When he kissed her, the silence in the chapel broke. Some applause followed. It was not loud, but it was real. The Duke had married the woman he loved, and nothing could undo it. The early months were not easy. Society did not forgive quickly. Several invitations were withdrawn. Certain doors remained closed. At their first grand dinner in New York City, Grace felt the weight of 100 judging eyes. She wore deep blue silk that evening. Simple, elegant. Yet she walked into the ballroom on Edward's arm with her head high. Conversation slowed. Fans paused. A wealthy socialite whispered loudly enough to be heard. "That is the companion." Grace heard it. Edward heard it. He leaned close to her. "Do you wish to leave?" "No," she said softly. "I wish to stay." They stayed. Grace spoke kindly to every guest who approached. She listened more than she spoke. She remembered names. She asked thoughtful questions. She did not shrink. By the end of the evening, something had shifted. Not completely, but enough. Within a year, the tone began to change. It was not scandal that defined her. It was her work. Grace visited schools in poor neighborhoods along the river. She funded books for children whose parents could not afford them. She spoke at gatherings about education for young girls. She organized quiet charity efforts without demanding attention. The newspapers that once questioned her began printing different headlines. "The Duchess of Ravenshire opens new school." "The Duchess hosts fundraiser for orphaned children." Edward watched with pride. "You were always meant for this," he told her one evening as they walked through the gardens of Ravenshire Manor. "I was meant to be useful," she corrected gently. "You are meant to lead." 2 years after their wedding, Grace gave birth to their first child, a son. Edward held the infant in his arms with tears he did not hide. "He will know," Edward whispered. "Know what?" Grace asked softly. "That worth is not inherited. It is earned." The Dowager Duchess arrived 3 days later. She entered the nursery quietly. Grace stood when she saw her. There was no anger in the older woman's face now, only something fragile. The Dowager looked at her grandson, then at Grace. "I was wrong," she said at last. Grace did not answer immediately. She saw pride in the older woman's posture, but she also saw regret. "I believed strength came from tradition," the Dowager continued. "I forgot it can also come from courage." Grace stepped closer. "I never wished to take your son from you," she said gently. "You did not," the Dowager replied. "You made him happier than I have ever seen him." Silence passed between them. Then the Dowager did something unexpected. She reached for Grace's hand. "If you will allow it," she said quietly, "I would like to know you." Grace felt tears rise. "I would like that very much." From that day forward, the resistance softened. Not everywhere, not all at once, but steadily. By their 5th anniversary, Ravenshire Manor was no longer defined by whispers. It was defined by laughter. 2 children now ran through the halls, a son and a daughter. Grace no longer walked through rooms like a shadow. She walked as Duchess of Ravenshire, confident, steady, kind. One evening, as the sun set over the Hudson River, Grace and Edward sat together on a stone bench overlooking the water. The air was calm. Their children's laughter echoed from the garden. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Regret what?" "Choosing me." Edward turned toward her fully. "Grace," he said quietly, "you were never a risk. You were the greatest certainty of my life." She smiled. "I used to believe love belonged to other women," she admitted. "And I used to believe duty required sacrifice," he replied. She rested her head against his shoulder. "You chose love over comfort. You chose courage over fear." They sat in peaceful silence. Grace thought of the girl she had once been, the companion, the shadow, the woman who believed she would never be chosen. Now she was a duchess, a wife, a mother. But more than that, she was still Grace, and she had never lost herself. Years later, their story would be told quietly in drawing rooms and village homes alike, not as scandal, but as proof. Proof that birth did not define worth. Proof that love could stand against tradition. proof that the most beautiful love stories were not those arranged by society, but those chosen by the heart. And whenever someone asked Edward Ravenshire why he had married a woman without a dowry, he would smile and answer simply, because she was the richest woman I ever met."